You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Hello and welcome to MidSouth Matters on Germantown Municipal Television. I'm your host, Ruth Dunning. On today's show, we're going to speak with Dr. Roger Easson, a retired professor of English at Christian Brothers University. Dr. Easson has spent many years as a writer of nonfiction works and as an editor of prestigious international academic journals, especially Blake Studies, which he edited with his wife, Kay. Recently, Roger has completed 6 volumes of his novel, Song of the Storm Rider, which is set in an incredible cosmos populated with various alien species. While some of these beings you will recognize, most originated in the fertile mind of Dr. Easson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Delighted that you're here and delighted to talk about this 6-volume extravaganza.
Thank you.
First, I want you to tell us where it's set and in what year it's set, and then we'll get on to the beings.
Okay. The novel is set in a geography that I know, and we all know. It's set here in Memphis, but it's set 300 years in the future.
Okay.
And it isn't called Memphis then, it's called Guardian City.
And it has some monuments and things that we associate with another city.
Right, in 300 years, I project that the seas have risen. And as a result, the coastal cities have been inundated, and the subsequent populations have mined those coastal cities for building materials. And so Washington, D.C. has been looted and the buildings have been brought inland.
Okay.
And so many of the great monuments of our capital now populate Guardian City.
Okay.
In particular, the National Cathedral has been brought in to become the Cathedral of St. Andrews. The Lincoln Monument has been brought in to become the Temple of Peace.
Okay, the kernel of history now behind the Lincoln Monument.
Okay, so the Lincoln Monument has been transformed into Guardian City's Temple of Peace. And I got this idea from history. When the Romans conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD, they found an extraordinary amount of wealth. And with that wealth, they did 2 things. They built the great Colosseum that still stands today.
Still there. We've all visited it.
And they also built the Temple of Peace. And the Temple of Peace was an enormous building, 100 columns maybe, and just an extravagant thing. And where other temples would sacrifice, let's say, 1 bull or maybe 2, like the Temple of Zeus, the Temple of Peace would sacrifice 100.
My goodness.
And the idea was that the floor of the Temple of Peace would be inundated with blood. And the message, the clear message was that peace is accessible through the spilling of blood. And so the Temple of Peace in my novel becomes just that kind of place where the conquest of humanity by vampires is celebrated in a great blood ceremony twice a year, once at the summer solstice and once at the winter solstice. And there they have a great mass of reconciliation, they call it, where they have a great mass of sharing the wafers and the blood. But at the end of that, up out of the chalice wells 1,000 liters of human blood that covers the floor.
Okay, now this is no
celebrate.
longer history.
Yeah.
This is now the
Now,
fertile mind of Roger Easson.
That's
yes.
how I translated the Roman Temple of Peace into the vampire Temple of Peace.
Okay, now vampires, you said. And most young people today are fascinated with vampires.
Right.
I want you to take us back to a little bit of real history now and tell us where the idea of a vampire came from, the disease aspect, etc.
Well, I think it's important for us to remember that the idea of pathology is relatively new.
Recent, right.
It wasn't until the discovery of the microscope by Leeuwenhoek that we were able to see the world of microbes beyond the world that we know. And when we did that, suddenly we began to understand that there's another way that disease is created, and that's through pathogens. Prior to that, they looked out and they saw contagion, and they didn't know how could a disease be passed contagiously. And so they imagined that cholera, for example, they'd look in the grave and they would see the decomposing corpse and how the blood would come into its chest and mouth, and they'd say, oh, this thing has been walking about at night and feeding and contaminating people. And the other great disease is rabies. And rabies brought a lot of contagion as well, simply by biting. And so these two diseases, cholera and rabies, gave us the idea of vampires and werewolves. And so it's really important to understand that disease basis behind it. So that's where the idea of vampires and werewolves come from.
And what about zombies? Do you have any zombies in your book?
I do have zombies, although I don't call them zombies, I call them revenants.
Oh, they're part of that additional group of aliens.
That's right.
But we have just a minute before we have to go to a break, so you can tell us right now in 1 minute about zombies.
A revenant simply is a creature that has been turned into this monster by a bite. And all revenants want to do is to bite and eat and contaminate other people. That's their sole goal. And they move through the world sort of like swarms of fish. They don't announce their presence by barking or yelling. They just move silently and attack through the silence as they come. So it's a terrifying kind of monster.
Ooh, that is terrifying. Tell us now, we're going to get started before we have to go to a break,
okay,
about your 4 kinds or 3 kinds of vampires
okay,
that occur in your book. The first one, the immortals.
Right. The traditional vampire is an immortal creature that, as a result of having had the virus or whatever it is transferred to it, he becomes unable to die, and he lives forever unless something intervenes. He's murdered or an accident happens. And so there is a long tradition of immortality among vampires. I added to that the idea that those immortals will sometimes bite a human.
Okay, we're going to stop with immortals biting humans,
okay,
and we will return to that bite in just a minute. We have to take a short break now. More with Dr. Easson when we return, so please stay with us.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Hello, and welcome back. We're discussing Dr. Roger Easson's 6-volume work of fiction, Song of the Storm Rider. And we're talking about the bite of the zombie, also known as...
We're talking about the three kinds of vampires.
Yes.
And there is the immortal vampire.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a kind of hybrid vampire in which a immortal contaminates a human. And so the human isn't naturally immortal. He has to be given the bite. And so I'm assuming that immortals have a genesis that makes more immortals, but the immortal can make vampires by contaminating a human. And so there are immortals, and then there are also human hybrids. And then I have a third kind of alien vampire, and that is a vampire that actually lives on the planet, the home world of vampires. Vampires are aliens in my book. They're not monsters. They are extraplanetary aliens.
We'll get to the cosmos
right.
a little later.
And so these other vampires, I call them true originals, are actually born out of a tree of life. And they emerge like the green man from the tree. And live in the tree, actually, until they eat of the fruit of the tree, whereupon they become vampires. So
this is a very fertile mind, Roger.
Yes, that is a wholly original kind of vampire.
Okay. And then we have another kind of alien called the Valdarians.
Yeah.
Okay.
The hero of this novel is an alien as well.
Okay. I think we may even have a slide with a picture of him. It's slide number 1, and we'll see if we can get it up. There we go.
Yeah. The Valdarian is an alien species that's very much like humans, except that he has platinum blonde hair and he has very light blue eyes and has extraordinarily almost albino skin. And he's tall, about 6 feet or so, and has an exceptional set of talents that not everybody has. So a Valdarian has a skill, and that is that he knows how to speak the language of creation.
Okay. Let's talk about the language of creation.
Okay. I got this idea from the study of the Bible. And the idea is that the name of God cannot be pronounced. And so why would that be? Well, because it's all wind sounds. And so there are no vowels, no consonants, it's all sibilants. And so the idea is if there is one word like that, there must be a whole language like that.
Okay.
And so I imagined that there is a language of creation built up of words that are all wind sounds, out of which the world was created. And so this language has gone extinct, except that it is preserved by the Valdarians. And the Valdarians have access to this language and can do extraordinary things by singing it. It's a sung language. It's not spoken. It's only sung. Hence, song of the Shadow Warrior. So this is his great skill. He knows the language of creation and can transform ordinary reality by singing this language. And he does extraordinary things throughout the novel by accessing this language.
And he's the good guy.
He is the defender of humanity.
Okay.
And he's been put in place to defend humanity from the catastrophe that has beset them, which is vampires.
Okay. Okay. So We have vampires, we have Valdarians, and we have the Fae.
Right.
Originally, the
fairies. The Fae are a very peculiar kind of creature in mythology. And we see them abused and misunderstood all over the place. In Shakespeare, they become these little creatures like you see in Peter Pan and Tinker Bell and so forth. The Fae, however, are full life-size aliens in my book. And they are a particular horror because their great desire is to feed on people. They eat people. Not that they're...
Like people eat pigs.
Like people eat pigs or people eat cattle. The Fae see us as prey animals, and they come here to harvest us. And so they, in my book, are almost worse than vampires. Vampires, at least, they feed on you. They don't necessarily have to kill you. But for the Fae, you are steak. You are the roast. And this is the great trauma of the novel. These are the true monsters in my novel. So the vampires, the Fae, and the Valdarians are all battling with the indigenous species, which is the human form. Now, the crisis that brought all these guys together was a great pandemic. And I proposed that 300 years in the past, there was a huge pandemic which killed 9 out of 10 humans. So we went from 9 billion people to about 800,000, which was an enormous catastrophe. And in that catastrophe, the vampires come up out of the darkness, seize control, and rule. And so this is a world in ruins, a world that is now ruled by vampires, and human beings are the species that is imprisoned and enslaved and pushed into servitude to the vampires. And that's how we start the novel, is seeing this servitude.
And we'll continue our discussion in just a moment. We'll be back with Dr. Easson when we return from our break. Please stay with us.
Cinderella found the pet that fits her perfectly. Tiana gave her pet the royal treatment. Belle found beauty where no one else did. And you can too. Share your heart. Share your love. Bring home your forever friend. Make a shelter pet part of your world. Happily Ever After begins at theshelterpetproject.org.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Hello, and welcome back. We're discussing Dr. Roger Easson's 6-volume work of fiction, Song of the Storm Rider. We have another cluster, or what you call a cluster of satellite aliens. Let's just briefly explain who these are. The elementals.
Well, we need to preface that by understanding that I see the world as totally suffused by aliens.
Okay.
Today, we look at aliens as a real anomaly. They appear on the horizon and go away. But I'm assuming that our world is absolutely overrun by aliens.
Okay.
And so we've got these dominant groups, but there's also lots of other kinds. And one of them is called the elementals. And the elementals are an alien that has come to Earth and learned how to manipulate Earth energy. So the elementals know how to manipulate water and stone and earth and air and fire. And so on top of the elementals then, there's another group called the transies. And the transies are a very powerful group of aliens, very rare, but they live in the interstitial area between time and space. So they're here and they're not here. They're there and they're not there. And so they become very important throughout the novel, and they become a kind of guide to our hero. Just lots of other aliens, but one of the biggest groups of aliens is a group I called the Cloud of Witnesses. And the Cloud of Witnesses I took from St. Paul. He talks about the cloud of witnesses. And I assume that there's this great group of watchers who watch everything that's going on, these aliens. And every now and again, they rally and come to the defense of our hero. But they are aliens who are suffusing the place, sort of like a great undercurrent of life. And there are lots of other little aliens running around the place, but those are the ones we meet most often.
And there are some great battles, great wars. Tell us about one or two of them.
Well, one of the great battles happens when our hero is confronted by a group of aliens, Fae, who are masquerading as vampires who come in and want to take over Guardian City. And so he is tasked to go in and meet them and negotiate with them.
Who's he?
He is my hero, and his name is Marcus Windblown.
Okay.
Marcus Windblown is the hero, and he is tasked with negotiating with these folks. And during the negotiations, they attack him.
They,
the Fae masquerading as vampires, which is a big mistake. Because as a result of being a Valdarian, he has some powers. And before he's done with them, there's 11,000 dead Fae. And it's a great battle that he fights. And he uses two techniques. One is terror. He's able to project terror in such a way that the aliens are completely paralyzed and unable to defend themselves. And in that process, he beheads them. He also is able to turn their bones to water, which is sort of an upsetting moment. You can imagine a warrior who is about to fight you suddenly discovering that he is turning into a puddle of flesh and his eyes are floating around in his head and he can't keep track, and he suffocates. So my hero turns thousands of them into these great flesh pancakes. And so by the end of this great battle, there's a lot of dead aliens.
Dead aliens, yes.
And they learn that maybe it's not the wisest thing to do to attack our hero without negotiating properly.
Did he not have, does his name not come from is there not a Milton backstory to his name or some character's name?
The name Marcus Windblown doesn't have a Miltonic background to it. But there is the idea that names in Milton and Renaissance tradition generally are characterizing names. And in this particular case, he is literally blown by the winds of chaos. So he doesn't really, in this novel, some of my friends have said, where's the plot? This is very chaotic. Why is this so chaotic? And I said, well, as the wind blows, so my character is blown. So it's a very episodic novel.
Okay.
And my hero is not as much the conniver as he is the responder.
Okay.
And his last name, his patronymic, his family name is Marcus. Everybody in his family is called Marcus. So last name first name last. And so it's an interesting name for a character.
Thank you, Roger. This was fascinating and zipped by much too soon. We need another whole 6 hours maybe to cover all these novels.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
We'll do it just as soon as we can. By the way, your books are now available online, and I'll tell you where, only. They are not available in a bookstore. You download them to your Nook or to your Kindle or whatever, your telephone, your iPad, whatever. So we want to thank you for watching MidSouth Matters, and the places you can get Song of the Shadow Warrior is from Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Kobo.com, GooglePlay.com, and Baker and Taylor. When you search for these, look for R.R. Easson and/or Song of the Shadow Warrior. If you have any questions about this or other shows on Germantown Municipal Television, or if you'd like to watch our programming, visit www.gmtvonline.org. You can also follow the station on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on MidSouth Matters.